The morning sun barely peeked through the school's hallway windows as May stood at her locker, her fingers trembling slightly as she arranged her books. The familiar sound of footsteps echoing down the corridor made her heart sink. She knew what was coming. It happened every single morning, like clockwork. A group of students rounded the corner, and right on cue, they started humming. It wasn't just any tune. It was her grandmother's song, the one she performed at last month's cultural showcase. The beautiful melody that had once filled her childhood home with warmth and love now echoed through the halls as a weapon of ridicule. Mai could still remember the day of the showcase clearly. She had been so excited to share a piece of her heritage, wearing the traditional dress her grandmother had sent from overseas. The stage lights felt warm on her face as she began singing the ancient lyrics, her voice carrying the stories of generations before her. But halfway through her performance, she noticed the snickers, the pointed fingers, the poorly hidden laughter. Now, every morning, those same students would pass by her locker, mimicking her accent with exaggerated tones. "Hey, look who it is, the opera star," one of them would call out, followed by more off-key humming and dramatic hand gestures. Mai would pretend to be busy with her books, counting the seconds until they moved on. The worst part wasn't even the daily mockery. It was how this had changed her relationship with the song itself. Every evening at home, when her mom would hum it while cooking dinner, Mai would feel her chest tighten. The melody that once brought comfort now brought back memories of stifled laughter and whispered jokes. But there was something her tormentors didn't know. Something that gave Mai a tiny spark of hope each morning as she endured their taunts. Every afternoon, when most students rushed home or to their clubs, Mai had a secret. A place where the song wasn't a source of shame, but something entirely different. As she stood there now, clutching her music folder close to her chest, Mai thought about her grandmother's words from their last video call. Music speaks what cannot be expressed, soothes the mind, and gives it rest, heals the heart and makes it whole, flows from heaven to the soul. Those words had become her daily mantra. The group finally moved on, their laughter fading down the hallway. Mai took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and grabbed her last book. The morning ritual was over, but her day was just beginning. She had plans for that song. Plans that would surprise everyone, including herself. As she walked to her first class, she hummed her grandmother's melody quietly to herself, but this time with a different rhythm, a new beat forming in her mind. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to make them understand. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. Because while they thought they were just mocking a song, they had no idea they were mocking magic. And magic had a way of revealing itself when the time was right. The bell rang, sending students scurrying to their classrooms. Mai joined the crowd, blending in with the rush of bodies and backpacks. But unlike before, there was a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She had something special planned for period 6, when the halls would be empty and the music room would be all hers. That's when the real story would begin. The final bell of the day rang through the halls, and while other students rushed toward the exits, Mai took her time packing up her things. She waited patiently, watching as the crowded hallways slowly emptied. This was her favorite part of the day, when the chaos of school life faded into peaceful silence. Making her way to the music room, she could feel her shoulders relaxing with each step. The room wasn't anything special. Just an ordinary classroom with a slightly out-of-tune piano, a few worn music stands, and chairs arranged in a messy semicircle. But to Mai, it was her own private studio, her safe haven where creativity flowed freely. She placed her backpack on a chair and pulled out her phone, where she'd recorded her grandmother singing the traditional song during their last visit. Pressing play, she closed her eyes and let the familiar melody wash over her. Her grandmother's voice, though slightly crackly through the phone speaker, carried decades of emotion in every note. Mai sat at the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys. She started with the original melody, playing it exactly as she'd learned it. But then, almost unconsciously, her fingers began to wander. She added a gentle jazz chord here, a modern rhythm there. The old folk song began to transform, like a butterfly emerging from its cocoon. She thought about the pop songs her friends listened to, the beats that got stuck in her head during math class. What if she added that kind of energy to her grandmother's melody? Her left hand found a steady rhythm while her right hand danced through the traditional tune. The combination was surprising, like tasting chocolate and chili together for the first time. Different, but somehow perfect. Hours seemed to pass like minutes in that room. May experimented with different rhythms, recorded bits on her phone, and played them back, adding layers upon layers to her creation. Sometimes she'd hit a wrong note or try a combination that didn't quite work, but that was okay. This was her space to try, to fail, to discover. The sun was setting outside, painting the music room in soft orange light, when May realized she completely lost track of time. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mom asking where she was. As she packed up her things, she played through her new version one last time. It was still her grandmother's song at its heart, but now it had pieces of Mai in it too. Her experiences, her struggles, her dreams. Walking home, Mai couldn't stop smiling. The same song that had brought her ridicule in the morning had just given her the most peaceful afternoon she'd had in weeks. She thought about how her grandmother always said that music was like water. It could flow around any obstacle and find its own path. She remembered the group of students who mocked her every morning, and for the first time, she felt a twinge of something new, not anger or shame, but almost like gratitude. Without meaning to, they had pushed her to explore her music in ways she never would have considered before. Their mockery had become her motivation to create something unique. That evening, as she sat at the dinner table with her parents, her mother noticed something different about her. "You seem happy," she said, serving May an extra dumpling. May just nodded, her mind already planning tomorrow's after-school session. She had so many more ideas to try, so many more ways to blend the old with the new. As she fell asleep that night, the merged melodies played in her head, traditional notes dancing with modern beats, each making the other stronger, more beautiful. May realized that she wasn't just playing music anymore. She was building a bridge between two worlds, note by note, day by day. And somehow, that felt like the most magical thing of all. It was a Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. May was so lost in her music that she didn't hear the footsteps in the hallway. She was trying something new with her grandmother's song, adding a gentle electronic beat that she'd created on her phone app. Her fingers moved confidently across the piano keys, the melody floating through the empty music room. The soft click of the door closing made her jump. She spun around to find Ms. Lee, the new music teacher, standing there with wide eyes and an even wider smile. May's heart raced. She hadn't asked permission to use the room, and now she'd been caught. But before she could stammer out an apology, Ms. Lee raised her hand. "Please," she said softly, "don't stop on my account." That was beautiful. May's cheeks grew warm. She'd been so careful to keep her afternoon sessions private, and now someone had heard her experimental version of her grandmother's song. But there was something in Ms. Lee's expression that made her nervous excitement fade into curiosity. "I've been hearing music from this room for weeks now," Ms. Lee said, pulling up a chair nearby. "I didn't want to interrupt because it was so lovely. Would you tell me about that song?" There was something about Ms. Lee's gentle question that made May want to share. Maybe it was the way she leaned forward slightly, genuinely interested, or how her eyes lit up when May mentioned blending traditional and modern styles. As Mai explained about her grandmother's song and her experiments with it, Ms. Lee nodded thoughtfully. "You know," Ms. Lee said, "this reminds me of my own story." She pulled out her phone and played a recording of traditional music that Mai had never heard before. "This was my grandfather's favorite song. When I was your age, living in a new country, people didn't understand this music either." Mai watched as Ms. Lee's fingers tapped along with the rhythm. But instead of letting their confusion silence the music, I did something similar to what you're doing. Would you like to hear it?" She walked to the piano and began to play. The melody was clearly traditional, but Ms. Lee had woven in elements of jazz and classical music. The combination was breathtaking. As she played, she explained how she had struggled with balancing her heritage with her new life, just like Mai was doing now. Sometimes, Ms. Lee said, her fingers still dancing across the keys, "What makes us different is exactly what makes us special. Those unique parts of ourselves, they're not something to hide. They're gifts waiting to be shared in our own way." For the next hour, they talked about music theory, cultural fusion, and the power of personal expression. Ms. Lee showed Mai how to better structure her arrangements, suggesting ways to transition smoothly between traditional and modern elements. She even taught Mai a technique for recording multiple layers of music on her phone to create fuller arrangements. "You know what's amazing about music?" Ms. Lee asked as they packed up their things. "It doesn't just cross cultures, it creates bridges between them. Every time we blend different styles, we're building new connections, helping people understand each other better." As Mai walked home that evening, her mind was buzzing with new ideas. Ms. Lee had offered to let her use the music room whenever she wanted, even giving her a key to practice before school started. But more than that, she had given Mai something far more valuable: the confidence to believe in her musical vision. That night, as Mai worked on her homework, she kept thinking about what Ms. Lee had said about differences being gifts. She thought about all the afternoons she'd spent trying to hide her music and how freeing it felt to finally share it with someone who understood. She opened her notebook and began writing down new ideas for her arrangement. Tomorrow, she would try something bolder. After all, she wasn't just playing music anymore. She was creating connections, building bridges, one note at a time. And for the first time since the cultural showcase, she felt truly proud of that. The music room had become Mai's laboratory of sound. With Ms. Lee's guidance, she arrived early each morning, well before the usual crowd of students who used to mock her. The sun would barely be peeking through the windows as she set up her equipment, her laptop, a small MIDI keyboard Ms. Lee had lent her, and sheets of music covered in her own notes and doodles. Today was different, though. Mai had spent the weekend experimenting with a music production app on her phone, recording layers of her grandmother's song. Now she was ready to try something bigger. She plugged her phone into the room's speakers and pressed play. The familiar melody filled the room, but underneath it was a gentle electronic beat she created, pulsing like a heartbeat. She sat at the piano, took a deep breath, and began to play along. Her fingers found new patterns, weaving jazz chords between the traditional notes. Sometimes she'd hit a combination that made her smile. Other times she'd wince and try again. But that was okay. Ms. Lee had taught her that every wrong note was just a door to something unexpected. Music is like cooking, Ms. Lee had told her yesterday. You start with a recipe passed down through generations, but then you add your own spices, your own flavors. Sometimes the most delicious dishes come from happy accidents. Mai thought about this as she experimented with different rhythms. She recorded each version on her phone, listening back, making notes about what worked and what didn't. The morning light grew stronger, painting the room in soft golden hues as she worked. She was so focused that she almost didn't notice when Ms. Lee slipped into the room, carrying 2 paper cups of hot chocolate. "I thought you might need a break," she said, placing 1 cup near Mai. "Tell me what you're working on." Mai played her latest version, watching Ms. Lee's face carefully. When she reached the part where she'd added a contemporary bridge between 2 traditional sections, Ms. Lee's eyes lit up. "That's it," she exclaimed. "That's the magic moment. Right there. You're not just mixing styles, you're creating something completely new." They spent the next hour fine-tuning the arrangement. Ms. Lee showed Mai how to use dynamics, making certain parts softer, others louder, to help the song tell its story better. They experimented with different tempos and rhythms, discovering how the smallest changes could make the biggest difference. You know what's really special about what you're doing? Ms. Lee asked as they worked. You're not just updating an old song. You're showing how tradition can grow and change while keeping its heart. That's a pretty powerful message. By the time the first bell rang, Maya had filled 3 more pages of her notebook with ideas. But more than just musical notes, she'd written down something else. Plans for where this could go. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to think about sharing her creation with others. As she packed up her things, May realized something had shifted inside her. The song that had once been a source of shame, then a private comfort, was becoming something else entirely. A bridge between worlds, a conversation between past and present. Walking to her first class, she passed the same group of students who used to mock her singing. They were hanging out by their lockers, but today, their presence didn't make her shoulders tense up. Instead, she found herself thinking about how they might react when they heard what she'd created. Because now she understood. What they had heard as strange and foreign was actually a gift, a melody carrying generations of stories. And with every new beat she added, every modern twist she wove in, she wasn't just making music. She was translating those stories into a language everyone could understand. That afternoon, as she worked on her homework in the library, Maya couldn't stop humming her new arrangement. A few students at nearby tables looked up, their heads bobbing slightly to the catchy rhythm. One even asked her what song it was. May just smiled, knowing that soon enough, they'd all find out. The morning announcements crackled through the school's speakers as May doodled musical notes in her notebook. She was only half listening until the words "Annual Talent Showcase" cut through her daydreaming. The event was happening in 3 weeks, and signups were starting today. May's stomach did a little flip. The Talent Showcase. The same event where, just months ago, she had stood on stage and faced those snickers and whispers. The memory still made her hands feel cold. She gripped her pencil tighter, trying to focus on her math teacher's explanation of quadratic equations. During lunch break, Ms. Lee found her sitting alone in the courtyard. "So," she said, settling down on the bench beside May, "I noticed you didn't stop by the sign-up sheet for the showcase." There was no pressure in her voice, just gentle curiosity. Mai poked at her lunch with her chopsticks. "I don't know if I'm ready," she whispered. "What if they laugh again? What if they don't understand what I'm trying to do with the song?" Ms. Lee was quiet for a moment, watching students play basketball on the nearby court. "Can I tell you something?" she finally said. "Last night, I was grading papers in my room when I heard the cleaning staff stop outside. They were listening to your music from the recording you made. One of them said it reminded them of home, but in a new way that made them smile." Mai looked up, surprised. She hadn't known anyone else had heard her music besides Ms. Lee. "That's what art does," Ms. Lee continued. "It builds unexpected connections. But it can only do that if we're brave enough to share it." She pulled something from her bag, a flyer for the showcase. "No pressure, but the sign-up sheet will be there all week." Throughout the rest of the day, Maya couldn't stop thinking about the showcase. During history class, she found herself imagining how her new arrangement would sound in the auditorium. In science, while her classmates were setting up their lab equipment, she mentally rehearsed the transitions between traditional and modern sections of her song. After school, she went to her usual spot in the music room. As she played through her arrangement, she thought about what Ms. Lee had said about the cleaning staff. Her fingers moved across the keys, and for the first time, she really listened to what she had created, not just as separate pieces of old and new, but as something whole and unique. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her grandmother, sending her daily hello from overseas. Mai took a deep breath and hit the record button on her phone. She played the latest version of the song, her heart pounding as she sent the recording to her grandmother. The response came faster than she expected. Her grandmother had sent a voice message, and May could hear the emotion in her voice. "My dear girl," she said in their native language, "you've taken our family's song and given it wings. It's still ours, but now it can fly to new places touch new hearts. That evening at home, May couldn't focus on her homework. She kept thinking about the sign-up sheet hanging on the bulletin board near the cafeteria. She thought about the cleaning staff who had stopped to listen, about her grandmother's voice full of pride, about all the hours she'd spent making something that was truly her own. The next morning, Mai arrived at school earlier than usual. The halls were still quiet as she walked to the bulletin board. The sign-up sheet had a few names already, but there was plenty of space left. Her hand trembled slightly as she uncapped her pen. Just then, she heard familiar footsteps. The group of students who used to mock her song was coming around the corner. For a moment, she froze. But then she remembered her grandmother's words about giving the song wings. Before they could reach her, she quickly wrote her name on the sheet. Walking to class, Mai felt lighter somehow. Yes, she was terrified. Yes, there was a chance people might not understand. But for the first time, she realized that sharing her music wasn't about getting approval. It was about being true to herself and her story. And that story deserved to be heard. The day of the talent showcase arrived with a mix of sunshine and nervous energy filling the school halls. May stood backstage, peeking through the heavy curtains at the growing crowd. Her hands felt cold, and her heart was doing little flips in her chest. The piano on stage seemed to be waiting for her, its black surface gleaming under the spotlight. She practiced countless times in the past 3 weeks. Every morning before school, every afternoon until the custodian would kindly remind her it was time to go home. She'd played the song so many times she could probably perform it in her sleep. But this was different. This was real. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a video call from her grandmother. May's hands shook as she answered. Her grandmother's familiar face appeared on the screen, smiling warmly. She was wearing her favorite blue sweater, the one she always wore for special occasions. Remember, her grandmother said softly in their native language, "This song has been sung by our family for generations. But you're the first one brave enough to give it a new voice. You're not just performing, you're building a bridge." May nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. In the background, she could hear the host announcing the first few acts. A dance group, a comedy routine, a violin solo. Each performance brought her closer to her moment. Ms. Lee appeared beside her, carrying 2 cups of warm tea. "Just like our rehearsals," she said, handing Mai a cup. "The only difference is a few more people get to witness the magic." Mai sipped the tea, letting its warmth calm her nerves. She thought about how far she'd come from those mornings of mockery at her locker. The same song that had once brought her shame was about to become something entirely different. 5 minutes, called the stage manager. Mai walked to the piano, her footsteps silent on the thick stage carpet. As she adjusted the bench, she caught sight of the group of students who used to tease her. They were sitting in the middle row, whispering among themselves. But instead of making her want to run away, their presence somehow made her more determined. The host announced her name. The spotlight found her. The audience fell silent. May closed her eyes, placed her hands on the keys, and began to play. The traditional melody flowed from her fingers just as her grandmother had taught her, pure and simple. She could almost smell her grandmother's kitchen, hear the song floating through their old house. Then, slowly, she began to weave in the new elements. A contemporary beat pulsed beneath the ancient notes. Jazz chords colored the traditional phrases. The melody began to dance between old and new, between past and present. She had practiced this 100 times, but somehow, at this moment, it felt like she was discovering it all over again. When she reached the bridge, the part where traditional and modern styles fully merged, she dared to look up. The audience was completely still. No whispers, no shuffling, no snickers, just pure attention. In that moment, something shifted. The nervousness melted away. Maya wasn't performing anymore. She was sharing something real, something true. Her fingers moved with newfound confidence, bringing the song to its final crescendo where all the elements came together in a burst of harmony. The last note hung in the air for a moment, like a held breath. Then the audience erupted. The applause wasn't polite or hesitant. It was genuine, enthusiastic, alive. May stood, her legs shaking slightly, and bowed. Through tear-blurred eyes, she saw Ms. Lee in the wings, beaming with pride. She saw the group of students who used to mock her, now standing with everyone else, their faces showing something that looked a lot like awe. She saw other students swaying slightly, as if the rhythm was still moving through them. As she walked off stage on wobbling legs, May realized something powerful. She hadn't just performed a song. She'd shared a piece of her heart, her history, her hope. And somehow, through the magic of music, that piece had found its way into other hearts too. The days following the talent showcase felt different, as if Maya was walking through a slightly altered version of her usual world. The morning after her performance, she stood at her locker, bracing herself out of habit. But when the group of students who used to mock her came around the corner, something unexpected happened. They slowed down as they approached, and one of them, the girl who had always led the teasing, stepped forward. "Hey," she said, her voice unusually soft. "Your performance yesterday, that was really cool. The way you mixed the traditional song with modern beats. I've had it stuck in my head all night." Mai found herself speechless, her hand frozen on her locker door. The girl shifted uncomfortably but continued, "I wanted to say, I'm sorry. For before, we didn't understand, and we were pretty awful about it." Other students passing by in the hallway stopped to tell Mai how much they enjoyed her performance. Some asked about the original song, wanting to know its history. A boy from her math class wondered if she could teach him how to blend different musical styles like that. During lunch break, May noticed more changes. Instead of eating alone, several students invited her to join them. They asked questions about her grandmother, about the meaning of the lyrics, about how she came up with the idea to transform the song. For the first time, her heritage wasn't something that set her apart. It was something that brought people together. In music class, Ms. Lee announced a new project inspired by May's performance. Students would explore their own cultural music and find ways to give it a contemporary twist. The same students who once laughed at traditional songs were now eagerly sharing stories about their own family's musical traditions. After school, May found a small group waiting outside the music room. "Could we listen while you practice?" one of them asked. "Maybe you could show us how you created those beats." Another student had brought recordings of his grandfather's folk songs, wondering if Mai could help him try something similar. That evening, during her video call with her grandmother, Mai couldn't stop smiling as she shared the day's events. Her grandmother listened with tears in her eyes, then shared something surprising. "You know," she said, "when I was young, this song was also changed by my generation. We added elements that our elders didn't always understand at first. Music is alive. It grows with each person who carries it." The following week, the school paper ran a story about cultural fusion in music, featuring May's performance as an example. The article included comments from students about how her music had changed their perspective on traditional songs. The music department started planning a cultural fusion concert for the spring, with Mai asked to be one of the student advisors. But the most meaningful change was inside Mai herself. The morning mockery that had once made her want to disappear had led her to create something uniquely beautiful. She realized that sometimes the things that make us different aren't walls that separate us, they're bridges waiting to be built. 1 month after the showcase, Mai sat in the music room after school, teaching a small group of students how to use music production apps to blend traditional and modern sounds. As she watched them experiment and share ideas, she thought about how far they'd all come. The same songs that had once drawn laughter were now drawing people together, creating connections across cultures and generations. That afternoon, as she packed up her things to head home, Mai paused at her locker, the same locker where the story had begun. She could still remember the sting of those morning taunts, but now they felt like distant echoes. In their place was something new, the sound of students humming her version of her grandmother's song as they walked through the halls, the melody carrying both the wisdom of the past and the promise of the future. She realized that magic wasn't about making things disappear. It was about transformation. Her grandmother's song hadn't changed in its heart. It had simply grown, like a tree adding new rings while keeping its roots strong and deep. And in that growth, it had helped others grow too, turning mockery into understanding, distance into connection, and fear into friendship.